First up is an introduction to this tutorial. Now, it's 8 years since I walked out to the lighthouse on Nelson's iconic BoulderBank. This 13-kilometre long natural causeway protects the inner harbour. In fact, my forefathers wrote about it way back in 1853. Essentially, the BoulderBank is a pile of unstable rocks, and the 7-kilometre walk out to the lighthouse is a tedious 2-hour slog. If you are a serious landscape aficionado, you'll know you need to put some serious effort into your photography, like all worthwhile pursuits in life. No pain, no gain. But it's always a bit of a lottery with the weather. However, if you do some thorough planning first, the outcome will be less predictable. So let's put some quality time into planning. Now, the key to success in this genre of photography is mitigating the chances of failure. The most arbitrary factor that affects your photo shoots is the weather. And here in New Zealand, with a maritime climate, the weather is really fickle. We can get 4 seasons in one day. Now, here's 5 tips for you to help with your planning. Firstly, check the weather forecast. Secondly, look at the tide charts if you're shooting on the coast. Thirdly, check the photographer's ephemeris to see where and when the sun will rise or set and what angle will the light hit your subject matter. The photographer's ephemeris app tells me today that the sun will set at a 284-degree angle. Next, look at a topographic map and estimate the time it will take you to drive and walk to the location. Now, I think the drive to the BoulderBank will take at least 20 minutes. And from memory, that 7.5-kilometre walk takes me 2 hours to get to that lighthouse. That means I better get moving. Finally, you need to pack your gear. Clean your filters and lenses, charge your batteries, get some warm clothing, and don't forget to pack some food and drink. Well, I've made it to the BoulderBank Scenic Reserve. It's time to get our boots on. Rightio, the end of the golden hour is here. I've spent about 1 hour scouting around this part of the BoulderBank for suitable composition. I've tried to shoot across the water to the lighthouse, but the sun and the rocks went. I've tried to shoot from further back, but the shots just were too wide and the lighthouse just looked too puny and small. The best tool of composition is your feet, so I've used my feet, I've walked around, got really close, I've eliminated things like that rock cairn. That was great with the light shining on a low angle against the boulders, but the lighthouse was too small and it was hard to shoot foreground interest and an obvious focal point and get them working together. So I've used my feet, I've gotten really close to the lighthouse now and I've got it breaking the horizon really nicely. Now I had the brilliant idea before the sun went down to shoot a panoramic stitch. So what I did is shoot a series of 4 different exposures from the left to the right, being very careful to overlap each shot by about 1/3, and I'm going to stitch those together in Photoshop. And I think that would be the best way to represent the scene of the Tasman Bay over here and showing the Nelson Haven over here, both bits of water with the lighthouse right smack in the middle. And I think with lighthouses it's good to show some ocean or harbour with the lighthouse because it's a maritime structure. The lighthouse is there for mariners and sailors, not photographers, and I think it's important to have some water in the scene, and that's why I've chosen this high viewpoint on top of the BoulderBank. Also note, the closer you get to a structure like the lighthouse, the taller it seems, and the more it breaks that horizon and looms really tall. Here's my final stitched panorama, which shows a lot more real estate than just a single photo. It's a very useful technique if you have a crop sensor camera and can't get a wide enough view. Anyway, let's summarize this tutorial. Now, you'll notice that 90% of the time, my camera settings are basically the same for landscape photography. That's the easy part, taking the photo. The difficult part is actually getting to the location, being in the right place at the right time with the right light. How to load raw files into Photoshop and create a panoramic stitch. Firstly, if you want to follow along with me, step by step, you need to find and select my raw image files. Here are the 14 shots I made while I was on the BoulderBank. You will notice that the photos end with CR2. That's the file extension that Canon cameras produce. Now open these files up in Photoshop. Personally, I like to drag the files onto a shortcut on my desktop. I've been using Photoshop for about 25 years, so I get into habits like this. This automatically opens the application. And voila, Photoshop is activated, and also the specialized app they called Adobe Camera Raw, or ACR. ACR is quite similar to Lightroom. The very first shot shows my red arm pointing. The very last image, down here, also shows my red arm again. These two shots were to bookend the sequence, so I know where the sequence started and where the sequence ended. Obviously we don't need these, we can delete them by just hitting the delete key. Just to be safe, I bracketed my exposures, hence we still have 12 left, but obviously we don't need them all. We will select the best 4 images, then stitch them together automatically. I think I'll use the median exposures, like this one, not the over or underexposed versions. Now, I like to rate the shots I'm going to use by holding down the Command or Control key and selecting a number from 1 to 5, say 3. Here we are, we now have 3 stars appearing. I also like to rate my shots using color because I'm a visual person. If you hold Command and Control and hit a number on your keyboard between 6 and 9, you'll get a different color. Let's use red. Now just scrolling down, I can see I bracketed a dark exposure and a really light overexposed exposure. And then I moved the camera and got this next shot, which I'll rate with 3 and 6 to get the red color. This shot I bracketed, bit dark, bit light. Next shot is moved, I'll rate that. And this shot was too dark, too light. I moved the camera one last time here. I'll rate that with a 3 and a 6. And then again I bracketed the exposures, which we won't use. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 actual compositions, which we will now stitch together. Let's work on the first image. On the top right hand side of the screen is the white balance setting displayed using the Kelvin scale. This shows the color temperature, which at the moment is 6,000 Ks or Kelvins. I'm happy with that. If I bring the color temperature to the left, the color temperature gets too cold. If I slide it to the right, I overexpose the lighthouse and everything gets a bit warm. So I'm happy with the color temperature, but below that is the exposure slider. If I increase the exposure, the highlights get blown out. Below this is the highlight slider. And if we decrease that to about -15, we can almost eliminate the red clipping warning on the lighthouse. Because most of this photo is comprised of intricate texture, all this foreground is rocks and driftwood, I want to push the clarity slider up a bit to give the shot more punch. This adds a lot more mid-tone contrast as we push it up. But again, be careful because too much clarity can add ugly and obvious shadows, halos, and desaturate the image, like so. Let's just push it up to a reasonable level, such as 20. Now, the vibrant slider is very popular as an alternative to increasing the global saturation, but it is a global adjustment. That is, it affects the entire image. I just want to make the sky bluer. So if we pushed up the vibrance, yep, it's definitely pushing up the blues, but also the yellows. This is my alternative. So let's move along to the fourth tab at the top. Locate the hue, saturation and luminance tabs. I like to decrease the blue value to about -20 luminance. And then go to saturation and increase the blue a bit, maybe +20. Something like that. Now, with panoramic stitches, all the images need to have the same exposure values. So, with the first image selected, over here on the left, hold down the Control or Command key and mouse click the other images you want. I missed one. Here it is. 1, 2, 3, 4 images selected. Right click your mouse and choose Sync Settings. In this case, we'll hit check all and go OK. Now I've applied the same settings to my other 3 images. Now we're ready to bring these 4 digital negatives into Photoshop. So we right click on the image, click Select Rated, because we'd color coded and rated these with stars, and voila, we've selected our 4 images the easy way. Now in the past, we'd now hit Open Images and bring them into Photoshop. But wait, in the 2017 version of Adobe Camera Raw, you only need to right click and choose Merge to Panorama. This is a one-step approach that speeds up your workflow. I'm choosing cylindrical. Now we use auto crop, but if I do take it off, you can see how Photoshop will soon stitch these 4 shots together. It's not perfect, and you will have to crop it down and lose data. If we hit auto crop, it does that for you, but you will be losing the bottom and top and a little bit of the sides. In the 2017 version of Camera Raw, it's got boundary warp, which means you could actually stretch and warp the image to fit the rectangle shape. I think we could just do a bit of that, but we really don't want to distort reality too much. And then we crop it. And you hit merge, name and save the file. Now look at the bottom left down here, there's the merged panorama. Now we have the final file here at the bottom left. The merged panorama is still in Camera Raw. We could open it in Photoshop, or we could tweak it more in ACR. Now there's 2 ways to skin this possum. Let's rate this and choose Select Rated to highlight the 4 other files, plus our merged pano, hit Open Images, and these should all load within Photoshop itself. Right, the files will open in Photoshop and we're nearly done. Now I'm going to show you the other way to create the photo merge, but from within Photoshop, because this works with older versions of Photoshop, way back to CS4 or earlier. So now we're under Photoshop. You can see here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 images plus that photo merge done in ACR. Now with these images open, point your mouse to File, Automate, and at the bottom, Photo Merge. A similar panel pops up, but with more options than in ACR. Now the really neat thing here using Photo Merge in Photoshop is the Content Aware Fill Transparent areas. See at the bottom? That wasn't within Camera Raw. So, like I said, you could choose cylindrical or spherical for a landscape, or just leave it on auto. We'll go for cylindrical. We hit Add Open Files. We'll get the pano and remove that. So we just have the 4 files we want. We don't actually need to select them. They just are there. Now, this is important. We tick Blend Images Together. We hit Vignette Removal and hit the Content Aware Fill. Click OK and go and make a cup of coffee. Depending on how fast your computer processor is and how much RAM the program has left to work with, this may take quite a while. But be assured the computer can work faster than you can. Photoshop will automatically stack the 4 images on top of each other, align them, then merge them together. The Content Aware Fill is an amazing feature that adds extra pixels around the perimeter of your panoramic. Voila! If we look over on the right, we can see the final panorama and hide it by toggling the layer visibility icon. And down here we can see the 4 original photos used to make the merged panoramic. Here we have a photo. On the right is the layer mask, which we can actually hide by holding the shift key. And it shows how Photoshop has distorted the photo to align it with the others and allow for lens correction. We can add the next photo. It's just used a bit of that, quite a bit of the next photo, and lots of the last photo. But because we selected the Content Aware tool within Photoshop, it's added all that extra data around the periphery or circumference of our panoramic. So I'll toggle it on and off. So it's added extra sky. I'm going to hit Control D or Command D just to get rid of the marching ants. And there's our final panoramic. We can turn off the layer visibility on the other 4 and just use this final panorama. There is a bit of anomaly down here where there's this bit of driftwood sticking out of the rocks and it's cloned it here down the bottom, but we can fix that later. Let's shift click all 5 layers and drag them into a folder. So we can hold shift down and use your mouse to click and highlight all 5 layers. Let's drag these into a folder and it becomes one group. So all of those files are hidden within a folder. That's just good file management. Now our final merged file seems rather flat looking at it. It really needs a boost in contrast and saturation. Let's do this using the native tools within Photoshop. Point your mouse to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and Levels. In the pop-up palette, click Use Previous Layer to create clipping mask, and click OK. A new layer is created and the associated panel pops up. Over here on the right above the 5 layers is the special adjustment layer, specifically the level one and a mask on the right. Now we can see on this histogram chart there's not many pixels on the right hand side over here. If we drag the highlight slider along, we lower the threshold to where the pixels stop, therefore increasing the exposure, like so. So just where the pixels stop, we can do that. Now we are blowing out the highlights, but don't worry, we'll fix that. Then we can drag the mid-range slider to the right, not too far, just to about 0.8, 0.8, like so, thereby increasing the overall contrast. This does blow out the highlights in the sky and more noticeably on the lighthouse. So we'll only apply this levels layer to the foreground. We do this by using the associated layer mask. So on the Properties panel, click the next panel here. This is the mask icon. Near the bottom, select Color Range. And in this pop-up panel, select Highlights. Instead of sample colors, let's just select the highlights. This will just select the blue tones, the sky and sea, indicated by the white area in the black and white preview. Move the range slider to the left to about 144. See what that's doing in this little preview is getting rid of the black in the sky. Then tick the invert box. Now we're selecting the foreground, not the sky. We can play around with the fuzziness a bit too, like so, and hit OK. Get out of Properties. Now we can toggle the layer visibility on for the levels and see what we've done. See how we've just increased contrast in the foreground and the land areas only? If you click the Alt or Option key and hit this mask, you can actually just see the mask itself and isolate it. That was hitting Option or Alt key, depending whether you've got a PC or a Mac, and clicking on the mask. If we're fussy, we can select the Brush tool, which is just B on the keyboard, and use a bracket tool to make the brush bigger or smaller. Down here, make sure that the foreground color is black, so we can paint black into the sky just to finish that. You can swap it here, like so, or just hit the X key. See, it toggles that. So we just paint white into the foreground, careful not to paint over the edges, of course. If you use the smaller bracket key, you can get the brush a bit smaller. Don't be too fussy here. If we hold the Option or Alt key and click the layer, there we are. Let's toggle that again. See how we've just increased the contrast by using a levels adjustment layer. Finally, the image needs a bit of sharpening, as all digital photographs do. To view this image at 100%, use the zoom tool down here. It's a magnifying glass icon. We can zoom in. Down the bottom left, it tells me I'm zoomed in at 154.3%. Can hold the Alt or Option key to go to 100. That's good enough. And if you hold the spacebar key, big long one on your keyboard, you can sort of move the image around. Let's isolate the bit of the lighthouse and some driftwood. This is really important. You must select the main file. We don't need the other four, just the merged panoramic. We want to select that, not a mask. Now I'm going to teach you the old school method of sharpening in Photoshop. You go to Filter, Sharpen, and Unsharp Mask. This filter's name is somewhat of a misnomer because we're actually sharpening, not unsharpening. Adjust the amount slider to about 125. Make sure the radius is set to 1 and the threshold set to 0. Now the amount you sharpen totally depends on whether you have a JPEG or RAW file and how big that image is. So it's all relative. It's about 125. Now you should be able to see here in the main preview outside the panel, by toggling the preview on and off, how much you're sharpening. I'm going to overdo this, something you should never do. I'll overcook it, put the radius up to some horrible amount, and you can see the effects of over sharpening. It's really awful. Looks like a bad HDR image. So I leave the radius at 1. Like I said, the amount slider, no more than 200%. Click OK. Voila, you have sharpened your image. Now don't forget to save the final image and you're done. I'll see you on the next tutorial.